Hello everyone, we are here at the Alabama Nature Center and we are actually on the hilltop trail almost before the switchbacks. If you're familiar with coming out onto our property, I wanted to let you know that in case you wanted to come out and see what we're looking at today, which is bloodroot. So these little tiny flowers are just a great indicator that spring is just about here. So these are a very fragile spring flower. They typically come up with one leaf, so a stem, a leaf that's curled around the very fragile blossom, and that's about it. You can see this one, you can see where the leaf is curled around where the blossom was. Sometimes they come up without a leaf, and the leaves just come a little later. So this is a member of the poppy family. So their blossoms are typically not very long lasting. They are a native perennial, and they typically flower in early spring, and one of the reasons is they like this open hardwood deciduous forest. And so as you can see, there's no leaves up there, so they get plenty of sunlight, and they're taking advantage of that before the leaves come onto the trees. They have nice open area, and it's typically when the soil is moist, and that's what they like. So they're also taking advantage of ideal water conditions. So these are called spring ephemeral plants, and so it just means that typically we group those together as any short-lived plant growing only during favorable periods, usually in the spring. They actually have some spring ephemeral plants have some type of growth inhibitor on their seed that needs copious amount of water to be washed off, and so that helps them prevent starting to grow until they know there's going to be a lot of water present. Now, this particular plant has some really interesting ways that it's pollinated and dispersed. So they are part of a group of plants that their seed dispersal relies on ants. They are, however, pollinated by bees, and they don't have any nectar, but they do have pollen, and their showy flowers and yellow middles are to attract bees, and the bees will come because of the pollen, and they'll transfer pollen from plant to plant. Now, sometimes if these guys start to open too soon, when it's still cold and the bees are not out and about, they have little sacs, they're pollen sacs, and they will actually eject that pollen out into the air and hope that it catches onto another flower close by. And so that's their way of dealing with pollination if there's no bees present. Now, once they've been pollinated, later on in the spring and early summer, they will develop seed pods, and those seed pods, they're teardrop shaped seed pods, and they will ripen and usually be carried off by ants. The ants will carry them away and eat the lipid coating on their seeds so that they will go ahead and germinate, and the ants will store it, and when they store it underground, it actually plants their little seed. So if you see a large group of bloodroot in this area, it's usually the work of an entire colony of ants that have been storing seeds for many years, and so that's why you'll have them all together like that. Interestingly enough, our non-native fire ants will damage the seed when they chew off the lipid coating, and they tend to deposit seeds in unfavorable places. So non-native fire ants have harmed this particular plant from being able to be spread. Another problem is non-native shrubs, so like Chinese privet. If it encroaches into an area like this, it doesn't have that open landscape anymore, and it doesn't get as much sun. and so they have, you know, habitat loss from those non-native things. So one of the reasons why, well, I can show you why it's called bloodroot. This is the rhizome, so it grows with a rhizome, and you can see it's blood red when you open it up. It also has the sap of the stem is kind of a orangey red color. And they have been used, particularly the rhizome. The rhizome is toxic if you ingest it. But it has been used for all sorts of medicinal purposes. If used properly, it can be used for all sorts of medicinal things. But it is, if you were to just ingest it like this, it's very toxic. So you have to be very careful with that. It's in the genus Sanguinaria, which actually means bleeding. So, and Native Americans were known for using this plant, and even in colonial America, using this plant for all kinds of things, including using the root as a dye, to dye baskets and clothing and stuff like that. So, if you're interested in growing bloodroot, it tends to like upland habitats. It needs shade, you know, further on in the year. So this is typically a very shady area, but it blooms when the trees don't have their leaves, and it can spread rapidly and easily. So it is a very pretty little native flower. A lot of other flowers that are typically blooming this time of year, like daffodils and hyacinths and things like that, are non-native, but this is a little native plant that can be easily grown. So I'm just going to look around at some of these other little blossoms. And if you haven't already, you should totally come to the Nature Center and hike up Hilltop, and you're just going to see just the whole trail on either side. Once you get to a certain elevation, it's going to be everywhere. And we've also have, worth pointing out, the little native violets have started to bloom. I think some of them started to bloom, and I got a little frost, so some of them look kind of sad, but they'll perk right up. Tiny, tiny, tiny little flowers. And this is one that's already finished blooming. And of course, once they're done blooming, they're gonna die back. The stem will typically die back. They'll produce that seed pod, and once it ripens, then that whole stem will die back, and then you'll just see their leaves, and their leaves can get quite large, and their leaves will last through the rest of the year and eventually die back in winter, and then the whole process starts again. But their leaves are very distinctive. So, hope you enjoyed learning about bloodroot, and hope you can come to the Nature Center, hike Hilltop, and get to see these pretty little native plants. Have a great day.